There's a quiet financial line most professionals never notice crossing, and yet it determines whether they operate from control or quiet panic. You can have the salary, the credentials, the apartment in the right zip code, and still be one unexpected expense away from behavioral change. Not bankruptcy, not ruin, just a subtle shift in how you negotiate, how you sleep, how you think about risk. The system doesn't warn you when you're below that line. It simply keeps you busy, consuming, upgrading, performing stability instead of securing it. And the uncomfortable part is this: the number that separates composure from pressure is far lower than you think. Most people assume financial freedom begins at $1 million. They imagine security as a six-figure savings account, a paid-off house, a portfolio throwing off passive income. In that world, $10,000 feels almost trivial, nice to have, but hardly transformative. It doesn't buy a luxury lifestyle. It doesn't replace a salary. It doesn't impress anyone at dinner. On the surface, it looks ordinary, and because it looks ordinary, it's overlooked. But that dismissal hides something important. $10,000 is not a wealth milestone. It's a structural shift. It's the point where your financial position quietly changes from fragile to stable, not visibly, internally. Here's the crack in the comfortable assumption that income determines security. Two people can earn the same salary, live in the same city, and hold similar titles. One lies awake when the car makes a strange noise. The other schedules a mechanic and moves on. One sees a $700 medical bill as a setback that ripples through the month. The other treats it as a line item. The difference is rarely income, it's liquidity. It's whether there is a buffer between today's inconvenience and tomorrow's survival. For many professionals, that dividing line is somewhere around $10,000. Escalate that crack further, and you start to see instability in how we define doing well. You can earn $120,000 a year and still operate in survival mode if every dollar is pre-committed to lifestyle. Mortgage, car payment, private school, travel, subscriptions. The margin disappears. And when margin disappears, autonomy disappears with it. Without margin, every decision carries pressure. Groceries become calculations. Social invitations become negotiations with your own budget. Career moves feel risky because you cannot afford a temporary dip. Chronic financial stress doesn't just affect your bank balance, it lowers your psychological baseline. It narrows your time horizon. It forces short-term thinking in people who are otherwise intelligent and disciplined. Now, here's the contradiction. Saving $10,000 does not upgrade your lifestyle. You don't suddenly dine differently. You don't change neighborhoods. You don't look wealthier. In fact, from the outside, nothing meaningful changes. Yet internally, almost everything does. That's the paradox. Externally static, internally transformative. The money does not change what you consume. It changes how you think. Because $10,000 doesn't upgrade spending, it upgrades position. It shifts you from reactive to strategic, from defending against shocks to managing risk. And beneath that shift is a hidden layer most people never examine. The real change is not financial, it's behavioral architecture. It's how your brain allocates attention once the threat level drops. When you operate below that threshold, your system is optimized for survival. Every micro decision consumes energy, brand or generic. Attend the conference or skip it. Take unpaid leave for an opportunity or stay safe. This constant calculation erodes focus. It reduces cognitive bandwidth available for long-term planning. You might be smart, capable, even ambitious, but without liquidity, your mental resources are diverted toward control rather than growth. Cross into 5 figures and something subtle happens. The emergency fund effect kicks in. The power is not in spending the $10,000, it's in knowing it exists. Car repair becomes inconvenient, not destabilizing. A job loss becomes a transition, not a catastrophe. The cortisol response declines, sleep improves, your psychological baseline rises. Stability doesn't feel dramatic, it feels quiet. But quiet stability is fertile ground for compounding decisions. Here's where systems thinking matters. Wealth is not built primarily through high returns. It's built through sustained positive margin. Margin creates optionality. Optionality creates leverage. Leverage, when deployed carefully, accelerates trajectory. $10,000 is not leverage in the traditional financial sense. It's behavioral leverage. It allows you to convert labor into freedom more efficiently because you're not constantly consuming your future to survive your present. The identity shift is the real transformation. Saving the first 1,000 feels mechanical. Saving the next few feels like discipline. Reaching 10,000 feels different. You stop seeing yourself as someone trying to save. You begin to see yourself as someone who retains capital. That identity alters decisions at the margin. You negotiate differently because you're not desperate. You walk away from bad deals because you can. You decline projects that compromise long-term trajectory because short-term cash is no longer oxygen. This is where many high-income professionals feel the discomfort. You may earn well, you may have credentials, but if your profit margin is thin, your autonomy is thin. Lifestyle creep quietly converts income into obligation. The car upgrades, the house stretches, the vacations expand. You look wealthier, but you are not wealthier. You are more leveraged to your own consumption. Let me introduce a simple framework I call the stability threshold model. Below the threshold, every dollar is survival capital. Above the threshold, dollars become deployment capital. Survival capital protects you from shocks. Deployment capital expands future earning power. $10,000 is often the first time you clearly cross that threshold. It's not about the absolute number. It's about crossing from fragility into control. Once you cross it, small expenditures change meaning. $50 no longer feels like a threat. It becomes a potential investment, a networking dinner, a skill upgrade, a professional membership. The same $50 when you have nothing saved feels reckless. With a buffer, it feels strategic. Reduced fear increases calculated risk-taking. Calculated risk-taking increases upside, not dramatically, gradually, through compounding. The structural power shift is subtle but real. When you can survive 3 to 6 months without income, your employer no longer holds total leverage. You can say no. And in economic terms, the ability to say no is power. It restores autonomy. It improves negotiation. It changes posture in interviews. You are no longer asking to be chosen. You are evaluating fit. Protect this forward, and the implications become more serious. If you never build that initial buffer, you remain permanently exposed to volatility, inflation, layoffs, market cycles. Each shock resets progress. Without margin, compounding stalls. You stay busy but do not advance. Over time, the gap between looking wealthy and being wealthy widens. One path optimizes consumption, the other optimizes control. The warning is not dramatic, it's structural. If you skip the stability threshold and chase higher returns instead, you build complexity on top of fragility. Investments without liquidity amplify stress. Risk without margin magnifies mistakes. The long-term trajectory bends not because you lacked intelligence, but because you lacked buffer. Now, if this resonates and you recognize parts of yourself in this tension between income and autonomy, this is exactly why I built Nick Finance. Not to sell urgency, not to push stock picks, but to explore these structural layers that most financial advice ignores. If you're between 25 and 45, educated, working hard, doing what you were told, and still feeling slightly behind, it's not because you failed. It may be because no one explained the system beneath the surface. On this channel, we don't chase hacks, we analyze leverage. We talk about profit margin in personal finance the same way a business would. We examine how lifestyle creep erodes optionality. We look at how capital is deployed, not just accumulated, because the goal is not to look wealthy, it is to build autonomy over time. So if you choose to subscribe to Nick Finance, do it with a specific intention, not to consume more content, but to refine your identity, to shift from consumer to operator, to think in terms of margin, gap, and trajectory. Over the next decade, your income will likely rise. The question is whether your control rises with it. That depends less on market returns and more on structural discipline. $10,000 is not the finish line. It is the first proof that you can retain capital. And once you can retain it, you can deploy it. Once you can deploy it intelligently, you can compound it. And once compounding begins, freedom becomes a matter of time rather than luck. So stay thoughtful, stay slightly skeptical, and if you want to keep dissecting the systems that shape financial outcomes, join me here on Nick Finance. Not for motivation, for clarity.